Hello, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Principles for Life. We're here today, okay, and we've got Simone here from Empower the People. We've got myself, Simon Spaniard from White Rabbit Trust, and then we're talking to Dr. Graves, the author of Jurisdictionary, which I know a lot of you are going to be familiar with. Okay, whether you're into this kind of alternative law movement or whether you're litigants, a lot of you will have come across this amazing course. I know I did, going back some 10 years or so, and it's helped me with one or two legal issues that I had. And a couple of, maybe almost a year ago, then I would say, maybe 8 months, 10 months ago, we were blessed to have crossed paths, all three of us. And certainly myself and Simone, with regards to crossing the path of Dr. Graves. And we have embarked on a collaborative website which we hope is going to be of use to everyone out there. And so that said, Dr. Graves, so do you want to perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to find yourself falling into law all those years ago?
Okay, to the extent that it might be interesting to some people. I fell in love with sailing years and years and years ago. And I lived in a little 25-foot sailboat. First boat I had was a 29-foot wooden boat built in Nova Scotia, which was a mistake. But then I had a little fiberglass boat, and I lived in that for 2.5 years, had a lot of fun. Didn't have a television, uh, didn't have an engine, uh, just a compass and some charts and some books. And then I built a 33-foot double ender gaff rig ketch, uh, which I thought was a beautiful boat. Your Robin Knox Johnston sailed the same hull, the same design around the world, and wrote a book about it. And again, I didn't have a television. Uh, I, I, I read. And at one point in my life, I walked into a library and a beam of light was shining on some gold lettered, leather bound volumes. And I started reading those. And then the strangest thing happened. After about 5.5 years, I guess it was, in the 33 footer, I ran into an object that wasn't supposed to be there, that was submerged in a sound in northern Florida, and the boat went down. And I didn't have money to salvage it, but I had a friend that I had sailed with for quite a number of years, and he said, "Well, why don't you go to law school?" And I was teaching in a private school. They gave me a very small amount of money to live on, but they also gave me a little house to live in. And I told the headmaster, I said, "Well, here's the thing. I'll apply to one law school. If they accept me, I will go. If they don't, I'll stay here and teach in your school the rest of my life," which I would have done. And they foolishly accepted me. And I say foolishly because I had already been shown through these old books that I was reading, which was, Franklin, Woolman, Marcus Aurelius, Penn, Washington, Adams, these people, that there was something was missing, that the law needed to be not only revised, but it all needed to be revitalized, and it needed to be made something that was amenable to the public. We don't have that yet. I've been trying to make it that for almost 30 years, to make the law amenable to the public. And now, meeting you wonderful people, we have another opportunity to present for the people the principles. I like to tell people, in fact, I did this morning, a group of people, another kind of a chat thing, the rules rule. If we don't have rules, then we have chaos. And if we have chaos, it sooner or later devolves into anarchy. And anarchy is the worst of human evils. But rules give us they give us a framework to live by, to get along with each other, to enter into contracts with people and expect some kind of foreseeable enforcement if necessary, because there are rules. We have a lot of people in the world today, they don't want rules. They just want to be their own rule and do their thing. And that thinking that they have is an enemy. I like to tell people those people are not the enemy, but what they think and the behavior that they have because of what they think is an enemy. So to present to the people in an entertaining way the principles, these primary principles for life, and to be able to win them over to this way of thinking and way of living that decides that it's a good idea to have rules. It's a good, and for those rules to be guided by principles. If the rules are only guided by self-interest or a political persuasion or some kind of somebody's idea about how things ought to be that may or may not agree with the rest of us, then we need to change them. But the way to change the law and change the rules is to be guided by principles. And that's why my wife and I are very thankful for you two wonderful people and the people that are helping you and supporting you, because we feel that this is really a moral imperative. It's a mission whose time has come for us to raise our sights and look beyond these issues that are just dividing us to the point where we're just reduced atoms. We're like sand on the shore. And we ought to be one huge granite block like Gibraltar, unmovable. And we're unmovable because we are there to defend innocence, to erect a system of law and modify the system of law that we have until it protects innocence by obeying these principles. The judges have to obey the principles, the legislators have to obey the principles, but the people also have to not only obey the principles, but to support and promulgate and publish the principles every way possible until our children understand that success in this life is a matter of following a path that has been set for us by people that have been long since dead. And that path is guided and lighted by principles.
One thing I just picked up on from what you were saying there, which is where quite often people want to do what they want to do. They don't believe that there should be rules. The problem with that is that I don't think people generally are mature enough or conscious enough to be able to live like that. And the problem that I often see is that those who those who want to live in that way, they demand their rights, but they fail to observe the fact that their rights end where someone else's rights begin. In other words, they ignore everyone else's rights and say, I know I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do. And they ignore anybody, any effect or cause on anybody else that their actions are actually having. And that's the problem. And that's why we do need principles as a guiding rule.
Absolutely. And because you use the word rights, this came to me recently, actually. We talk about rights, but then when do we talk about what is right?
Mhm.
What's right for one may not be right for another. That's not what we need in the world today. We need to be brought to a point where we stand together and say, no, this is right, this is wrong. And no matter what you think your rights are, your rights derive from the idea that there is a right and there is a wrong. And where I have a legitimate right, I have that right because it is right. It is the proper thing. It protects innocence. It controls the aegis of government. That's right. That's what we need. And we don't have the society, the public doesn't have a clear idea of this concept, which is called right, derecho in Spanish. It's Gesetz in German, droit in French. It's a concept. It's J-U-S in Latin. It's the first three words of the word justice. But the people have no idea. It's never been taught. But we're going to do it. We are doing it, and we're not going to give up. And when we're gone, other people will continue this because it must be continued. This lamp must be lifted for the entire world to be guided to the right place.
Yeah, well, this is part of a bigger problem I think that we see out there is that, for too long now, we've become compromised by the world, by the way society, the way it's been shaped and formed through, you could say influenced in malevolent ways or potentially in ways that is harmful to us. And because it's become compounded generationally, where kids learn it from their parents, parents have learnt it from their grandparents, and it's this slow and steady erosion of conscionability, and really knowing the difference
Mm.
between right and wrong. And part of that, I believe, is all to do with spirituality,
Mhm.
going back to source. Because I know a lot of people will say, oh, religion's bad, and we shouldn't be religious, but fundamentally what the scriptures, the Bible teaches you, is the core values on how to live morally upright and how to maintain that. There is a standard, there's a plumb line that we can attain to. And it's not a difficult one. It's not a difficult benchmark at all. But the world and the systems of this world over time has eroded what is good, what is right, what is noble, what is true, what is just, what is wonderful to behold, what is beauty. They've
Mhm.
eroded that over time. So actually, we have a poor perception of what right is. We don't see it potentially like, maybe 100 years ago, how they would see it.
I think people have confused their rights for their wants, and that
Mhm.
line has become blurred. Okay, is what they want, they believe they have a right to, and this is self-entitled kind of culture that's emerging nowadays. But in terms of what you're getting at, I think there was a law commentator, I can't remember who it was, who actually said that if we imagine everyone are kind of like is like a tentacle of government, then in order to maximize your rights, you must do the law and uphold the law. And if you were to
Mhm.
allow, if you saw a neighbor breaking the law and you allowed that neighbor to get away with it, then you have just diminished your own rights. And it took a while, you have to contemplate that and think about that long and hard, because a lot of us, sometimes we allow people to get away with things, and really we should be pulling each other up. We should be each other's policemen to some extent, and pull each other up and say, hey, that wasn't really right what you were doing there, okay? Because we're here to keep each other on the straight and narrow.
Let me say this, because it seems that, I tell people frequently, they're lost in issues, this issue, that issue, one thing or another. And I want people to understand that without principles, you're never going to solve the issues. You're always going to be I mean, the word issue by definition implies that there are two sides to the question. I think the wisdom that God has shown you guys is that there are some things about which we can agree. And it seems to me that that way we lay a foundation for a movement. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Where people begin to scratch their heads and say to themselves, yes, why didn't we think about this? Why? I mean, just for example, I'm meeting with some Christian people, this leaders, Christian leader type people this afternoon, and trying, it seems odd that I have to do this, but to try to raise their awareness to realize that among all the other things about Christianity, we have an innocent man that was murdered by the chief priests and judges of Israel. But when we think about Christ and the church and all that the church has done these past 2,000 years and what it hasn't done, but it boggles my mind to realize that there doesn't seem to be much concern about the injustice of Calvary or the principle that presents for us, that we could be working to attenuate the injustice in the world, and to see that that's a primary principle. Innocence needs to be protected, and we need to work for that. And anything that undermines that principle or obfuscates that principle or tries to diminish the principle, it becomes an enemy. call it a spiritual enemy, an intellectual enemy, but anything that gets between our efforts and the success we seek, which is peace on earth. Now, let's face it, that is what we're after, is peace on earth. That's what it all comes down to, and a reasonable amount of prosperity for each of us. I mean, what more do we want? And if we don't have principles to guide us, then we're like somebody in a ship trying to navigate to a foreign shore, and we don't know how to get there. So I just admire and thank God for you two, that you're willing to put in this effort to try to promote the idea that above all the issues are the principles, and that without the principles, you're just going to remain mired in this muck and mire of issue arguments and never get anywhere. I was watching some debate on the floor of the United Nations this morning. I managed to force myself to turn it on and watch it. And here they are, fighting and fighting and fighting about what's right. What's right. And they don't yet seem to have that measuring stick to determine what's right. Well, I can tell what's right and wrong. All I have to do is look at the cross. Look at what happened to my friend. He was nailed to a cross. That's wrong. I know that's wrong. I remember the Crosby, Stills and Nash song. Remember back in the early 70s? 4 dead in Ohio. What if you'd seen her? What if you knew her and saw her dead on the ground? The time has come and gone for us to be elevated by things that are greater than we are, and to encourage other people to be elevated, to see that there is something beyond the issues. I think that's the goal, and it's something I've grown into over the years. I mean, I didn't know all this when I was 12 years old. I didn't know it when I was 72. But at 81, it's pretty darn crystal clear, and your help in getting this message out there that the principles must guide civilization, or we're not going to have civilization.
Let me just come back to this then. So Dr. Graves, you've touched on a little bit about your background, how you got into law. So what led you to create jurisdictionary then? Because a lot of people have attended the course. How did you come to write the course?
Well, as I said, I was shown these principles, that we're working together now to promote. One of which is that, the blind force of the people is waste and ruin, that it must be economized, it must be guided by intellect. This is just a reality. There's no two ways about it. I mean, people can hear what we're saying and disagree with us and turn the channel, like the song goes, turn the page and ignore us. But you can ignore the truth all you want to, but the truth remains the truth. The blind force of the people is like gunpowder burned in the open air, or steam unconfined by science. It's waste and ruin. It has to be guided. And the motive of the blind force of the people is self-interest. It's always been that way. I guess it'll always be that way until we begin to see that we are all in this together. Life is a gift. It ends. I'm 81 years old. I don't know how much more time I have to involve myself in what I hope is a worthwhile venture, to try to bring a little bit more light into the world where there's way too much darkness. I had fun the other day. In fact, one of the people I'll be meeting this afternoon, I said to him, I said, well, I don't believe there's a flashlight that casts a cone of darkness. The darkness doesn't have power over the light. You can't shine darkness where there's light and make the light run away. But you can do dark things in the presence of human beings that don't know what the light is, and they'll scurry like rats. They'll run away from responsibility. And they must be educated. They must be empowered so it's not just about we three trying to empower other people, but empowering people to empower each other. So we stand together on these fundamental principles that are absolute truth. Only the truth is true, nothing else is. And there is no flashlight that will cast a cone of darkness. The darkness can't invade where the light exists. So if we don't have light, The darkness has no choice. The darkness will be there. And that's what we have. That's what we're looking at right now, which really seems to be threatening the demise of civilization, certainly threatening the demise of self-rule governments. I mean, and this is a serious matter.
Mm.
And we can all get caught up with, well, should this be this or that be that, and pick an issue and get a flag and march in the streets and make a big noise and all that. That's no, we're all going to have a different point of view on issues. It's like opinions are like noses, everyone has one. But we've got to get to the point where there are these principles that should be guiding us. And one of those is that the blind force of the people will, without restraint, destroy itself. I hate to think about the children suffering. I hate to think about dismembered babies. I hate to think about what's going on in parts of the world right now where women and children are being slaughtered for political expedience. And who's going to stop it? Who's going to lift the light? Who's going to make a difference? Who's going to sound this clarion call that screams at the world and says, innocence must be protected? That is the most high primary principle. There's nothing beyond that. It is the obligation of government to protect innocence, and it's the obligation of the people and the responsibility and the duty of the people to demand that their government, in every individual case, that they protect innocence, not corporations, not the welfare of the state, not the welfare of one industry or another, but the welfare of individual people, individuals, like that fellow they nailed to a cross. So whether you want to think about that as religion or not religion, I mean, let's take religion out of the picture for a minute. It was wrong what they did. And it's wrong anytime and every time that innocence is destroyed for the sake of expedience. And hopefully the work that you're doing will reach some people who will begin to say, well, this is really good. Let's get on board. Let's advance this idea that the truth is our friend. And maybe it's inconvenient at times, but it's not going to change. It's not going to move. It's not going to adjust itself because we all get together and stamp our feet.
Well, I think if we get to the core of what we're actually talking about, and to a large extent, it was yourself, Dr. Graves, that inspired this in terms of when we first got together and spoke. And you mentioned, I mean, I guess we're all on the same page, but you expressed it and were able to crystallize it in words so that we were able to understand and then create the website which we're launching today. But in essence, I guess what we're driving at for people to understand, just to put it in another way, is that from a moral point of view, you need to be able to measure what's right and what's wrong. And when you see something happening, we all need to be on that same page. We all need air to breathe, right? That's a commonality. We all need food to eat. We all need water to drink. We all need somewhere to lay our head at night. We all need a roof over our heads to keep us dry when it's windy, raining, cold, and keep us warm. We need a home, somewhere to call home. And those are the commonalities that we all share. And so on that basis, we can build something, we can work together. Yes, as Dr. Graves has said, we all have different opinions. That's fine. We support different football teams. We like different things. Yeah, great, lovely. If we were all the same, it would be boring. So it's great that we have differences, and we should celebrate the differences. But by the same token, we have to come together to uphold something which we share. And though what we share isn't the fundamentals that keep us alive, but also should be, from a moralistic point of view, we should be able to measure what's right and what's wrong, and we should all recognize what's right and what's wrong when we see it. And only then can we actually call out the poor behavior and turn away from it. I mean, I remember seeing various programs, and dramatizations and stuff like that of life in the 50s. And you'd have okay, uh, life happens, life goes on, and say for example, a young girl, a couple found themselves pregnant, and they weren't married, and they might be shunned, right? Now, okay, whether we think that's right or wrong, you know, life happens, life goes on. But the point is, everyone at that point in time had a shared measure. Okay, perhaps not the best example, but they all had a shared measure, a shared plumb line as to what was right and what was wrong. And to some extent, we need to get back to that on some of the bigger, more key basic issues, because I think
Yes.
somewhere along the line, we've lost that in today's modern society. We've lost that. And that's precisely what the website Principles for Life is intending to do. It's intending to get us to agree on key principles that we, and morals, if you like, that we can all share and uphold.
You talk about principles and about these being the guiding plumb line, if you will, the standard that we all need to aspire to and work towards achieving together. And I'm very aware that the courts and the law system operates on the same basis. There are principles in law which are the foundation of law, right? And often I believe they're called maxims. As I understand it, maxims are principles that can never be broken. They stood the test of time. They've been shown over and over again that they work, that every judge is bound by them, every court system is bound by them. They can't tear down a maxim because it's been proven over and over and over. It's been tested over and over throughout the centuries. So is that what we're trying to create here with these principles?
I think it's part of it, yes. I have a book, Commentaries on the Laws of England by William Blackstone. That book and a Bible and a good horse and a 45 caliber revolver settled the West here in the United States because it was all we knew of what law should be. And one of the points that one of the maxims actually that's near the back of this big thick book that I have, he says the welfare of the people is the number one obligation of government. But then he has another maxim, and it says that the welfare of the individual is a measure of the welfare of the people. We don't have that so much as we did, and judges are not educated about the maxims. Yes, they should be. And my prayer, really almost a daily prayer, in one way or another, is that someday soon we'll come to the point where the people will control the courts. The people will demand and obtain obedience to these maxims, these primary principles, because they are the truth. And to stop judges from thinking, well, what's good for the collective is good for the individual. No, that's not the way it works. That's not a maxim. That's not always true. A maxim is always true in every situation. What's good for the individual is what's good. In fact, we talked about, the nailing of someone to a cross. And that all began, and it's written in the books. You can look it up yourself, where it says where the Caiaphas, the chief judge, said it's better that one man should perish than the entire nation. That's bad thinking. And yet that should be a maxim for every judge in every court on this planet. That no, what's convenient for the society is not good if it devalues the value of one innocent person. That value of one, I like to call it that, the value of one should supersede and be at the top of all of these principles, that every single one of us is important, and we are more important than the benefit to General Motors or the royalty over there where you people are. I hope they do have all the caviar and wine that they need to sustain themselves, but the rest of us have to live. And those people in high places need to be succursal to and obey these things that are always true, because if we don't educate the people, the bar is not going to do this. They are not going to self-discipline. I've been around this for almost 40 years. That's almost 4 decades. I know what lawyers are. They are not going to self-discipline, but the public can discipline the bar. And once we have the bar under control, and by getting the American people and the English people and the French people, German people, and people all over to realize that these principles are their security. It's what protects their children from the abuses of tyranny. And they have to be published. They have to be promulgated in every way possible. We start with your website. But hopefully, I thought about Jimmy Buffett before he passed away, and I had a friend that knew him, and I was hoping someday I would meet Jimmy Buffett and we'd have him sing a song about this and make up a song, and maybe we can find some other people. I know a man that knows Johnny Depp. I've been trying to get him to introduce me to Johnny Depp, so maybe Johnny would connect us with some people in Hollywood that would want to do something to promote this idea that it isn't about personal opinion. It's what is good for each and every one of us. And we can stand up and fight for that once we understand how to be heard, how to be effective, but how to use language skillfully and obediently, to be obedient to the language and say these things clearly. And get rid of all of the confusion that is just trying to it's like that flashlight with a cone of darkness. It just wants to shine into every good thing that we try to do. And once we begin to realize that light is the answer, truth is the answer, these principles are the answer, and yet they're not well known. And thanks to you and the inspiration you have, they will be better known to at least some people very soon.
You remind me when you talked about the judges and the system, that they often choose a comfortable outcome for many, for a large section of society, and thereby overlooking the individual, the person or the people that matter. And it reminds me of the story in Genesis with Abraham, and he wrestles with God in prayer over Sodom and Gomorrah. And as we know, Sodom and Gomorrah is full of sin and debauchery and people who are not measuring up to any kind of plumb line, right? They're all over the place. They kill people, they steal from people, they thieve from people, they've got no conscience, they want to do bad things to people. And yet God was going to destroy that whole entire city, and Abraham prayed and wrestled with God. But God, if there are 50 righteous people there, surely you wouldn't kill them all. And God said, well, no, you're right. If there are 50 righteous people there, I won't. He goes, but what about 45? And God said, yeah, okay, well, if there's 45, I won't. What about 40? Okay, 30, okay, 20. And he went all the way down to 5. But what, God, what if there's just 5 righteous people there? And he was in prayer here. So it's showing us that God is merciful, but more than that, he's looking at the individual. He's not looking at the whole of society. He's looking at the individual. And every single patriarch, every single character that you find throughout the scriptures, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, they were all tested. They were all tested, not because God didn't know what was in their heart. He knew what was already in their hearts. But he's testing them so that they can know what is in their hearts. And I think that's, a lot of people in this world, in this reality that we find ourselves in, they go through test after test after test and not really realizing that fundamentally that test is for them to know what's in their heart, to do right, to do justly, to do mercy, to love, to be compassionate, to have more patience, and all those virtues that the godly virtues that make a difference in the world, shining the light rather than the darkness. And you know, it just reminds me of how precious each and every one of us. You said earlier that every soul is valuable, right? We've all got value, an immeasurable amount of value. Our soul, we're unique. Your fingerprints are unique. Your voice print is unique. Your heartbeat is unique. Your DNA is unique. Your environment is unique. You know, everything is unique about you. Even the sound of your voice is unique. You know, God has a plan and a purpose for each one of us on an individual level. He cares deeply about the individual. And yet, each one of us walk by our neighbors, our friends, the stranger in the street, and we don't see them with that value. We don't look at them and say that soul has value and we should respect that. We should honor that. We should celebrate that. And I think that a lot of that comes from self-interest, self-preservation, that inward focus. But if you believe that you deserve all good things coming to you and that you deserve good things in life, well, surely your neighbor, the stranger, the homeless man on the street, your kids, they all deserve the best as well, right? And I think a lot of people fail to recognize, like you say, that we're all one, that ultimately we each carry immeasurable value, and we should be treating and connecting with people and treating people in a way that honors that. And we don't. And hopefully, with these priority principles, that's the place that we can get to.
Hey, look, well, what you mentioned about the value of one and how certain parties, perhaps in courts, perhaps with government even at the moment, and certainly maybe corporations, and they overlook the one and they go with, well, what's best for the many? Okay,
Yes,
ignore the one. Okay,
yes.
so on that basis, I've often thought about this and contemplated this. Who would be the one then that loses their rights? Would someone in the corporation or the government be willing to stand up and say, okay, look, appreciate someone has got to lose out. In order to benefit the many, someone's got to lose out. I'll be the one. You never see anyone come forward from government or corporations and actually volunteer to be that one, do you? That is actually going to be on the losing side. As long as it's always a case of if it's someone else, somewhere else, and we perceive that there's few in number or just one of them, what do we care? You know? But none of them would actually volunteer to be that one that gets the short straw and loses out.
We had a we had a friend he was a carpenter. I believe he was a boat builder. He walked around in sandals. He volunteered to be that one.
I know, yeah, I know. I was gonna mention that.
Okay. And he was lifted up, and he is an example. If we would only see him a little more clearly, see the cross a little more clearly. Also, you're talking there reminded me of a friend, a four-star general that befriended me, Lewis Walt, who he was one. He pushed a machine gun implant and a placement, very heavy piece of machinery up a hill under constant fire to protect his friends. And there have been thousands, tens of thousands, millions who have stood in the gap and given everything they had, their breath, their blood, their life, everything for love and wisdom and to make the world safe for the children. And that spirit is alive. But if God will just use us, or wisdom, whatever, don't offend people and make them think we're talking about religion. In my mind, it's not about religion. God is real. God makes the wind blow, and if you don't believe that the wind is blowing, you have a serious problem. But anyway, we have an opportunity to marshal these thoughts in a cogent way, an entertaining way, a way that will draw people to take an interest and realize that the best for all of us. If you want to talk about self-interest, if we were really acting out of self-interest, each of us would realize that the best thing for us individually It's what's best for all of us all together. But it starts with the individual. Myself, my neighbor, you, the people we're going to see this afternoon, everybody. We all matter. The value of one is the primariest of, there's a word, primariest of principles. The value of one must be upheld. It must be honored. It must be defended. And it has been throughout the centuries. And people have been inspired to do the right thing and work for what's right. But the publication of those principles has fallen by the wayside. And you are to be applauded in every way possible. And I pray that you will be supported and people will help you, and that this will actually begin to make a difference, and people will pick it up and do music, do art, ballet, write a symphony. I mean, do all these creative things that we can do to celebrate that each and every one of us is a light.
There was a film called A Beautiful Mind.
Yes.
And in that film, Russell Crowe played a true story, based on a true story, played John Nash, a great mathematician. And they say that mathematics is the language of the universe. Well, if that's the language of the universe, there was a scene where he's trying to come up for his dissertation in university. He's trying to come up with an idea. What's he going to look at? What's he going to base his dissertation on? And they're out. Him and his friends are out in a bar, and one of his friends goes up, I think, and asks a girl out for a date, and she kind of, or for a dance, and she rejects him. And he strikes upon a unique idea. He said, "Well, hold on a second. You know, we're all looking at the good-looking girl, the one that stands out, the stunner. You know, we all want to go and ask her out, but she's probably going to knock all of us back. And so, if we get knocked back by her, and then we try and ask one of her friends out, the friends are going to say, well, hold on a second, what, my second choice? And they're going to knock us back as well." He said, so it's in the interests of all of us that we leave the stunner, we leave the good-looking one, or the really, really good-looking one, the model one, and we go for the other girls, because at least that way we all get a dance and we all get a date for the night. And so they did, because in other words, that's what sparked. I'm not saying you should all go out and do that, but that's what sparked his thesis, his dissertation, the basis of his dissertation, which was that each of them individually will benefit and will maximize or optimize their benefits when all benefit and optimize their benefits, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, they all got dates by working together and not trying to tread on each other's toes. And so what benefits us as individuals, it must benefit. The only way we can maximize and optimize our own rights is for everyone else around us to have their rights optimized as well, and for them to be happy and in a good place and in a good state of mental health and in good physical health and have a positive outlook. And when everyone's operating on that basis and is happy and smiley and wanting to serve each other and look out for each other, well, then we're naturally going to be part of that, and we're going to benefit from that.
Incoming, gentlemen.
Aye, aye. Deep breaths. Nash, you might want to stop shuffling your papers for 5 seconds.
I will not buy you gentlemen beer.
Oh, we're not here for beer, my friend.
Oh. Does anyone else feel she should be moving in slow motion?
Will she want a large wedding, you think?
Should we say swords, gentlemen? Pistols at dawn?
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
Yeah, and those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
I'm not gonna strike out.
You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make her drink.
I don't think he said that.
All right, nobody move. She's looking over here. Right, she's looking at Nash.
Oh, God. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait until he opens his mouth. Remember the last time?
Oh, yes, that was the history books.
Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. but they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. Adam Smith said, the best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said, that's right? Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Ash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell.
Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith. What's wrong?
Yep, here we go.
Careful, careful.
Thank you.
But I want to move on, Dr. Grays, and speak a little bit about the priority principles that we've selected so far, obviously guided by yourself and what's been, you've been very much spirit-led on this, and it's been something I believe you've been brooding over for some time. We've come up with these initial 7, right, that we've published on the website, and where you've said, people should do a dance or music or a symphony or a poem. We've made provision at the bottom of every principle for people to write comments. They can vote.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things we'll be calling people to do, is vote on the principle, whether they believe that that's a principle we should adhere to together collectively as one or not. But there's also the opportunity to then comment, leave your thoughts, your feedback, your comments on those principles. But if people do become very creative and they want to express those principles in other ways, song, dance, music, poetry, other ways, maybe graphics, something artistic, we can actually put that on the same page underneath all those principles, and slowly we could build this kind of collective of contributions from the community out there, the wider audience.
Wonderful.
All right, well, let's go through each principle then, and let's help our audience to understand them a little bit better. We've got 7. Well, the first one is, it's never right to do wrong.
Well, how can it be? How can it be?
I'm not going to argue with that.
I mean, we could say that about all these things. I mean, how can it be right to do wrong? I don't know what to say. How can it be right to do wrong? If there has to be a way to do right in every situation, to do what's right, to take the time to choose instead of just rushing in, and this has to be dealt with, and exigence raises its ugly head, and everyone steps aside and says, no, we do away with this man because he's trying to upset the government of Israel. We have to get rid of him. No, it was wrong. It was wrong then. It's wrong today. It's wrong everywhere it happens. It's never right to do wrong, period. People that don't want to agree with that, there will be people that have all kinds of ideas. Well, sometimes you have to do wrong to get right. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I always believe that when you do wrong, even though you might not necessarily realize it, might be an unintentional wrong. It might be something that you didn't mean, and you just circumstantial. It was a side effect of something, potentially. But even when you're not really sure whether something's right or wrong, if it is wrong, you normally feel it inside. You normally have a sense that something's not quite right. It's
Oh,
almost
I
like
do.
you become a little bit aware. You become aware that there's an imbalance. I always say that if you do something wrong, you've got to pay the price, and sometimes that price is never being at peace. Do you see what I mean?
100%.
Simon, what do you think about it's never right to do wrong?
Well, you've got that saying, haven't you? 2 wrongs don't make a right. So on that basis, if something wrong has taken place, or if you've done something wrong, rather than, I mean, let's say if you've done something wrong, it would be wrong to then try and cover it up. The best way forward is always to say, you know what, I made a hash up of that. Hands up. I made a hash up. They said this is in Dale Carnegie, actually, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Mhm.
You know, you put your hands up, you admit to it, you even berate yourself, and people will step up to defend you and say, look, hold on, it wasn't that bad. You don't put yourself down, blah, 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 blah. And so by doing the right thing and taking the hit on your pride, ego, whatever it may well be, and confessing to the fact that actually, you know what, I made a goof up there. I shouldn't have done that for whatever reason. That's the right thing to do, is to come forward, and people will defend you and look out for you. Whereas if you made a goof up and you then try to cover your tracks and you lie about it, the moment you then get found out, it's 10 times worse. It's not 2 times worse. It's 10 times worse, because people will look at you in a whole different way. And so, from that perspective, that in itself, we've all kind of come across situations like that, little things, and we know how that feels. We know when people have tried to deceive us and try and get out of something, and we know then that it's very difficult to ever trust those people again, or rely on those people, or depend on those people. So that in itself actually highlights that principle.
Well, you create a chasm, don't you, with the other individual. If you've lied to somebody, or if you cheated somebody, if you're not being completely honest, you put a gap between you and that individual. You don't realize it. It's a metaphorical gap, but you've kind of then put a distance where, like you say, you sense it, and energetically you sense it with that individual. But I always think as well, if you do wrong by accident or on purpose, you can always correct it. I mean, you've always got an opportunity to do right, to make it right. I'm not saying that that there aren't consequences of you doing something wrong, but you've always got an opportunity to turn it around. You don't need to just stay there in wrong, right? You could put your hands up and say, I've made a mistake here, but actually I want to go even further than that, and I want to make things right.
But there's a good feeling in doing things right. I mean, for example, look, I mean, blimey, I know I've had a number of car accidents. I've accidentally bashed into someone in the car park. Okay, me being rubbish at driving, parking, whatever the case may be. Do you just drive off? How are they going to feel? Right? What, you think that you've got away with it? I mean, you're insured, so that's why you got insurance, right? So you leave a note and say, look, I'm really sorry. I've been a complete klutz. I've hit your car. I didn't mean to. Here, and the fact I didn't mean to is demonstrated by the fact I'm leaving a message for you. Please phone me. We'll put it right. I'm really sorry. And that actually, believe it or not, when you then do something like that, that actually leaves you feeling pretty good. Yes, there's a consequence. So what? Your insurance premium's going to go up a little bit. But you were the one that, okay, maybe you need to pay greater attention, and that will make you pay greater attention in future. In fact, if you look at it from this perspective, would you rather not be paying attention and you hit someone in a car park and you hit their car, a little scratch, whatever, and it costs a couple of £100 or a couple of $100? Or would you rather not be paying attention on a motorway or a freeway in America and you end up dead?
Mhm.
Right? So, in actual fact, when these little things come along to try to shake you and remind you that, hey, hold on, pay attention, because I mean, who's giving you that warning? Are you sure that warning wasn't put there for you?
Okay, and then when we look at principle number 2, the protection of innocence is the government's highest priority. What made you think that that would be a good primary principle for us?
Well, what if government did not protect innocence? What would we have? What we're moving toward now with, this autocratic idea that we're the government, you're not, and we're going to tell you what, and you're going to obey, and if you don't obey, we'll destroy you. That's not the kind of government that I want. I don't think it's the kind of government anybody wants. But without education, without being willing to submit to these principles, and and for the public themselves to finally become a voice that has power to control these people that are making these decisions in high places, we're just going to keep going down this slippery slope. And the value of one will just continue to be ignored. And we need to restore that. Absolutely. Whatever the government does has to protect every little child, every baby, every elderly person. And that should be one of the talismans or guideposts that we use to decide whether or not the people that are in high places are making the right kinds of decisions. Are they protecting the little guy, or are they fighting for somebody that knows how to build rocket ships or invent a new central processing unit for your computer? We have to, these people over here need to be done away with to make room for these other people. No, that's not the government we want. That's not the idea that was instilled in the minds of the people that brought England to the point where England seems to want to head spiritually. That America was, for a while at least, we were kind of trying to move in that direction. We were inspired by the wisdom of your English jurists. And now it all seems to be unraveling because we don't have those principles to guide us to decide and measure what people in high places are being given the power to do.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of government do we have if they aren't protecting the innocent? I mean, what does that say about a society if they are not protecting and looking out for the most vulnerable in society? What does that say about us as people?
Well, the question, I think, is if they're not protecting the most vulnerable in society, then who are they protecting? That's the question. If what they're
Yeah.
protecting are those that are the wealthiest, or those that can actually buy that protection, well, then what does that actually say? That says that a government is bought and is just becomes a private security firm, doesn't it? So, ultimately, when if we think back to way back when society was formulating, I know obviously it evolved over the years, but if we imagine that actually there was a conscious decision by millions of people just to come together and create this thing called government and social welfare and stuff like that, what would the reason have been for that? The reason surely would have been for paying into things like national insurance and stuff like that. The reason would have been that, hey, I appreciate there are some people that are down on their luck. There are some people that are alternatively abled. There are youngsters and there are old people. And then the rest of us work. And we want to be able to support all our loved ones and look after them and protect them. We want to all be protected with police forces and stuff like that when things go wrong. But by the same token, if we fall out of luck and we lose a job or we have an injury or something like that, we want to be supported. Well, if that all starts falling apart, what are we doing it for? What are we paying for, right? So somewhere along the line, that all went off the path and went onto a different direction. And to a large extent, it hasn't come back onto the pathway. I mean, we can all stray from a path. We can all be walking through the woods and stray from a path. But how do we get back onto the pathway through the woods in the forest? How do we do that? We have to look for that path and we have to, intentionally come back to it. Otherwise, we're just wandering through the woods and where are we off to? And that's where we are now, right? And perhaps it's being encouraged from certain parties or from certain quarters, and perhaps there's just a lethargy in the general populace, and that's another need for the principles. For someone to come and say, look, hey, hold on, let's just have a rethink here. What is it that we really want? For some of us, we're only going to be on this earth for another what, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, right? And then it's down to our children and our children's children. But the same goes for you that are watching this right now. What are you leaving for your children? I'm sure you didn't have your children wanting to put them at harm's risk.
Or bring them up within a society or under a government structure that puts them at risk.
No, exactly. So what do you want for your children? Because unless you do something, if everyone looks around them wanting someone else to make it happen, nothing's going to happen. You have to make it happen. You have to make it happen because you're the ones that are here. You're the ones that are responsible, and so you have to take responsibility. And that's another part of a facet of the principles for life is taking responsibility. We are the ones that are responsible for everything that's happening now. We are partly responsible, and we are the ones responsible for changing it. And unless we grab the bull by the horns and change it and do what is required to bring about change, nothing's going to change.
Okay, moving on then. Principle number 3, government exists to serve man, not the other way round.
Well, we have erected this gigantic edifice of power around us. And we agree to that, you know, in a civilized society, we agree to have government and we agree to fund it. But as we were saying in the previous principle, all of that is for our welfare. And we don't live to just create that government. That government exists and is empowered by us to serve us. And we need to see it that way. We need to see that clearly. And again, this is one of those things. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be talked about. I know people that they will not talk about serious things. They just will not. They'll, you know, they want to talk about football and, you know, what Susie did last week or whatever. And you try to talk to them about serious things that are affecting their lives and the lives of future generations, and they don't want to talk about it. Perhaps part of the reason they don't want to talk about it is because they don't really have much to think about it. They've never been counseled or challenged to think about these things, but they need to be thought about. They need to be thought about more and more and more. They need to be sung about. They need to be danced about. We need artwork. We need movies. It's doable, but we're not here to serve government. That's ridiculous. Government is here to serve us. And the more that we all understand that and get involved and stand up to it, like Simon is saying there, wise as you are, as we're all saying, the more of us who realize that this is the obligation of government because it's an absolute truth, it's a priority principle, then the world begins to be sane again.
Yeah, you know what I like about this particular principle is that, you know, we understand government is a fiction. You know, we've created it. We as man created government, not the other way around. Government didn't create man. And I love that you've got the government and man juxtaposed within this principle, because I think it's an important lesson to keep reminding ourselves. You know, the government would like us to think that they are the law, the end, the beginning of everything, when really it was man. And really, man's role is to serve their fellow man. So we should be in service to one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we as man have created government to serve man. And I know, Simon, you know, you talk a lot about this, and you've taught a lot about this. So I suspect you'll have a bit to say about this principle.
Big build up there, look. Creating the expectation. Well, look, there's the old saying, isn't there? You get the government that you deserve. So one of the certainly over in England, certainly when people used to pop down to the pub and have a beer, one of the topics of conversation will tend to be government, and people will moan about government and complain about it, and yet they'll do absolutely nothing to again to change it or to bring about any kind of positive effect. And that's because I think a lot of people took the easy way out, didn't they? You said, Simone, about, you know, man's purpose here. In fact, one of the highest purpose is to serve your fellow man, right? Is to be in service to others.
You can live a whole lifetime without ever being awake.
Hey, Socrates. You know so much? How come you're working at a gas station?
This is a service station. We offer service. There's no higher purpose.
And pumping gas?
Service to others.
Obviously, we have to feel that others deserve our service, and service can take a number of shapes and forms. But again, in terms of the way that I think modern society has actually, I mean, what is it that came first? Was it that we lost our sense of responsibility, and that's created the modern society that we've got? Or was it that modern society has encouraged us to absolve ourselves of any responsibility? I don't know which came first, but either way, we're at a juncture where a lot of people don't want that responsibility, and they've delegated that responsibility to this thing called government. And as well as their purpose of serving their fellow man, having delegated that to government, they've also delegated their ability to think, and they've allowed government to now do the thinking for them in many respects, and hence the fact that they don't want to think about anything serious. They'll just leave that to other people to tell them what to do. And we've seen that more and more, certainly over the COVID period, but, certainly it's coming to a situation where those in government, and I think those in government recognize that, and that's actually encouraged governments around the world to actually adopt this authoritative, autocratic position where they are believing that they can tell everyone what to do, and they are political monarchs, aren't they? In many respects, that's what they've become.
We become complacent, and they've taken advantage of that, haven't they?
Freedom requires vigilance, and I think I've said this before, and for anyone out there that's not heard this, okay, I want you to imagine that you're in medieval times, let's say King Arthur times, right? And you've just won a battle, and you triumphantly go to your castle, and you're the one that's when you're the victor, you're the king, and you put your guards outside the castle, and you're inside, partying it up, having a big banquet, and so on and so forth. Here's the question: do you never have to be vigilant again? In other words, right? In other words, is it guaranteed that no one ever will try to take your crown? Well, we know through history that that's not the case. We know that there's always someone somewhere that will have their eye on your crown. And we were each born with a crown. So we cannot, in terms of our freedoms and our rights, if we are protecting our crown, as it were, we cannot cease to be vigilant. Because the moment you cease to be vigilant and you decide that, oh, well, I don't really need the guards at the drawbridge. I don't need the guards there. I'm the king. I won, didn't I? I won that battle 5 years ago. I don't need to worry about anything. The moment that you start standing down your guards and that you're not on guard anymore, and the moment that you stop being vigilant is the moment that an army plonks itself outside your castle wall, and now you're done for because you're not prepared for it.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. Well, number 4 then. Rights are worthless when enforcement is impossible.
So we have people, as we were agreeing here, they go to the pub, they have a pint, and then complain. And complain and complain and complain. And for the most part, until we have more education, like what you're working hard to do, until we have more and more and more and more of this education in this direction, advancing, I think, in this direction, the people are going to continue to believe that the only power they have is the political power. You carry a sign in the street, get your friends to carry a sign. Maybe you can get thousands of people to carry a sign in the street. Maybe somebody will do something. But if the people in high places choose not to do anything, that's the end of it. You had a good march, and then you went home, and that was the end of it. But people that know how to go to court, people that know how to file a pleading, people that know what a cause of action is that gives them a right to go to court, that gives them a legal inroad to open that courthouse door and march in there with confidence and say their say on the record, that's preserved on the record, becomes part of the public record, and to call witnesses and to demand that the people in power obey the law that's in existence at that time. Well, those people know how to enforce their rights. People that don't know how to enforce their rights, that's just something that we need to be working on. Everybody ought to know how to enforce their rights. Everybody ought to know how to go to court, file a pleading. It's called a pleading. You plead with the government You say, this happened to me. Somebody had a duty. They breached the duty. I suffered damages, and I have a right to be heard. I have a right to call witnesses. I have a right to make these people answer questions under oath. I have a right to put them in jail if they refuse to answer questions under oath, because that's what the law is. That's what all our friends died for in wars in the past. That's what people are dying for today. People will die, probably innocent people probably died or were imprisoned in the time that we've been here chatting with each other today, because that's the condition of the world today, because we don't have the education that we need to empower the people to be able to enforce their rights.
When I had some thoughts around this particular principle, yes, rights are worthless when we don't know how to enforce them. But if there is no way to enforce them, then they are worthless rights. Just because you don't know how to enforce them doesn't mean to say that they're worthless. But when
Right.
you remove the ability to enforce it entirely, that's
Yeah.
when they become worthless, right? So
Yes.
this whole priority principle really points to a need for schools around the world to be teaching from a young age what rights are and how to enforce those rights, about
Yes.
the court system, about simple principles to do with the law. That is completely missing from the education schedule in anyone's, in Western society anyway. I don't know any school that teaches any kind of law, or the fact that you've got rights, or the Constitution. I mean, in America it might be slightly different. You probably do learn about your Constitution, but certainly over here we don't. They don't do it on purpose, right? They don't want us to know our rights. They don't want us to feel empowered, so they don't teach us our rights, or how to make a complaint to the police, or how to start an action at the court, what components are required to take a case to court, and also cost. There's always a cost issue to going to court. They often want you to have a lawyer to represent you, but you don't actually need that. If you know how to do it yourself, you can do it yourself, which is, knowing how to enforce is one thing, and not having any ability to enforce is another. And I think this principle really, like I say, goes to the heart of education from a young age.
Well, that's where Dr. Graves.
Absolutely. And that's music to my ears to hear you say that. Let me just say one thing, and then I want to hear from Simon. But I've heard all my life, well, I have a right, I have a right, I have a right. And now with the viewpoint that I now have, and the viewpoint that you're having, and that you're going to this extra effort to share with other people, is we are beginning to realize that rights that you can't enforce, they're promises. It's just a promise. So the government promised me, okay, well, so what? If I don't know how to enforce my rights, do I have rights? Yeah. Do they have a value to me personally? No. I wrote some poem. A poem I wrote some time ago comes to mind, where these people are living in very extreme circumstances. It's cold, and the moisture is coming through the walls. They have very little to eat, and there's a knock at the door. And at the end of the poem, it's, Ivan Ivanovich, it's state police, open up. We've had that throughout history, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, I think you've got the dual aspect there. So on the one hand, you've got rights that are not enforced or can't be enforced become worthless, but that's an individual choice. And that's why it's amazing that you've got and this is why there's such value in Dr. Graves' course. So anyone that hasn't seen it or heard of it, Jurisdictionary, there's going to be a link on this platform. That's a course which will show you how to enforce your rights, as something that, we've attended. So attend it, learn how to do it. So from an individual perspective, if you don't know how to enforce your rights, you yourself have rendered your rights worthless. But the flip side of that coin is where the state perhaps seeks to obstruct the ability for you to enforce your rights. And I'm sure people would be up in, would be moaning or protesting about that. But to protest is really to ask someone else to do your job for you. I mean,
Yes,
I remember my dad. My dad once told me when he was at school, he and 5 of his friends were caught mucking about in an assembly, in their morning assembly. And they had to sing their hymns, and they were called out, and they were forced to stand on stage, and they were going to be forced to sing the hymn on their own. And each of them decided to leave the singing to the other 5. And when the hymn started, no sound came out because they were each miming. Now, that demonstrates if you leave it to somebody else and those other people do nothing, nothing's going to happen, right? So in that example, they'd each left the singing to the others. All of them had the same idea. No song was sung. So it is the responsibility to enforce your rights, and in so doing, you then force the government or the state to make those rights accessible. And if the government doesn't make those rights accessible or obstructs to such an extent, well, then that government is probably no longer going to be the government, and an alternate management system would be put in place, right?
Well,
Good.
the legitimizing, the government has to be legitimate. So to make it legitimate, it seems to me a reasonable thing that the time has come now that we have technology, we have AI and animations and music and all this ability to communicate in so many different entertaining ways, that it's, the time has come. This is it. This is happening. What you're doing is happening, and it is having its good effect already, and it's going to have an increasing good effect. And the people on this planet are going to take control, and we're going to make this planet the paradise that it can be, where the children play in safety, and everyone is protected by everyone else. It's a beautiful thing.
There has to
Time's
be.
come. We've had enough sadness, enough sorrow, enough tears. Let's move forward.
Yep.
All right. And then we've got principle number 5. The ends do not justify the means. What do we mean by this one, Dr. Graves?
Well, my sweet wife bought me some chocolates the other day, some nice dark chocolate covered cherry cordials. I just think I should go in there and eat all of them. And I could probably go to the store and they have more of them, and I could just eat dark chocolate covered cordials. But I'm not going to get what I want. The end result is not going to be what I want it to be. So the means, what I do today determines what I get tomorrow. And the whole thing with the Marxist view, the collectivists, the communists, their whole thing is, and it comes back to what we were saying earlier, the value of one, that just do whatever we need to do to get what we want. And then when we finally get there, we just leave a wake of destruction and sorrow and anguish and disappointment. And what we end up with is something that we don't want. We just can't just do whatever we want to do to achieve whatever we want to achieve without being aware and responsible for the consequences. And part of this principle tells us that we need to adjust the means. We see the ends, and we can't just take the first thing that comes to hand and use that to try to achieve the ends. We do want to achieve the ends. But it reminds me of a brigadier who befriended me. I don't know why these people befriended me, but a whole bunch of people have. And he had served in World War II. His job in World War II was an assassin. He would put on an SS officer's uniform and go to parties with, very high-ranking SS officers. And his job was to invite whoever was to be the victim out onto the patio, go out in the garden, smoke a cigar, and talk about how wonderful the Fuhrer is. And then he had a very small. He told me they were just all it required was a 22 caliber that was very small and didn't make a lot of noise at the base of the skull. So that might offend you too. It does offend some people that are super sensitive, but his work saved thousands of lives. This whole thing, I'll just go out on a limb here and just say this whole thing that's happening in the Middle East and elsewhere, and in Ukraine and in Africa and so many places that we don't even know about that's going on. There are other ways to solve these problems, and you just don't have to use an atomic bomb to do what you can do with a stiletto.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just, it isn't right. And to ignore the welfare of women and children, that is, as if they didn't already have a stigma, but that stigma is going to stick with them forever. And in fact, I was just reading last night in the Gospels where it said that where it's written that they said that his blood will be on us. And they're talking about the one they nailed to a cross, that his blood will be on us. And it is. And someday that has to change also. Someday something has to happen. The mercy of our mercy or whatever, the goodness that we may yet demonstrate in this planet has to sooner or later bring them to the realization that what they've done and what they're doing is wrong, just as what so many other people, including each of us, in somewhere in our past, we've done things that are still with us, that reduce our ability to be totally 110% happy, because we have these things that we wish we hadn't done. And what's happening over there is just wrong, and it's the same old thing. It's that same principle. The ends do not justify the means. They don't, wrong does not make right.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be teaching our children these things. We need to be teaching each other these things, but doing more than teaching, we need to be trying to constrain the activities of people in high places where they have this power that we have given them with our tax dollars, so that they begin to come into line with reality and deal with these atrocious things that are going on, and we turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
There's a film called I, Robot.
Oh yes, I saw that one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the robots were programmed with 3 rules.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't act outside of those 3 rules. Those 3 rules were there to protect people. And with what's happening over in so many of these war-torn places, if they were to pay attention to the principles. So, for example, with what they're doing, if they said, well, can we do X, Y, Z? Well, is it going to harm the innocent?
Mm-hmm.
And, should we be doing that? Because
There you
it's
go.
not right to do wrong. And if they were to check, if this were to act like a checklist, then a lot of what we see going on now with what you just described, Simone, and yourself, Dr. Graves, it wouldn't happen.
Unless the killer's still in here.
You're joking, right? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I know. The 3 laws, your perfect circle of protection.
A robot cannot harm a human being. The first law of robotics.
Yeah, I know. I've seen your commercials. But doesn't the second law state that a robot has to obey any order given by a human being? What if it was given an order to kill?
Impossible. It would conflict with the first law.
Right, but the third law states that a robot can defend itself.
Yes, but only when that action does not conflict with the first or second laws.
You know what they say? Laws are made to be broken.
No, not these laws.
Well, this is it. There's multiple options. There's different ways to achieve something. And I think a lot of what we see nowadays is just the quickest, cheapest, most destructive way to get there, because it's often the cheapest and the quickest. And therefore it's, maximizes profits, for example, and corporate greed. But that means that you are not diligently seeking out the best route to avoid all the negative stuff. And we see a lot in governments. We see public inquiries and all these, costly time and money that is spent from the public purse in investigating all these, means by which people have reached their end, because they haven't done it correctly. They haven't done it with looking at, well, here are the options. We're going to go with the best option that doesn't create lawsuits, that won't create a public inquiry.
Well, here's something controversial, right? Governments need problems. They need problems to solve, right? And if there weren't many problems to solve and everyone did things, and were diligent and respectful and took responsibility, government would be not as big as it is now, and the budget wouldn't for government wouldn't necessarily be as big as it is now. And they wouldn't then be able to command such huge salaries.
They're there to serve us.
Mm.
And the service is solving problems. Absolutely.
Sure. Oh no, absolutely. And delivering services. I mean, I often think that government is like children. It should be seen and not heard.
While you were talking, I thought about that there's a consequence to compromising with error. And it seems to me that at my old age, that people sometimes they want to compromise, and compromise can be good. But if you're compromising with error, you're giving error a little bit of a foot in the door, then there's a consequence. There's going to always be a consequence when we allow error to come in. If you read Das Kapital, you just have to read the very few, I don't know, just maybe 3 pages. You'll get the idea of the con. The whole thing is a con, that the working class can have all they want by taking it from the ruling class. But for example, in Dickens' time, the ruling class, they owned the mills, and the working class were laboring in the mills, and it was a horrible thing. It was terrible, the child labor and all these other things. But to think that the working class can take the mills away or destroy the mills or kill the ruling class and now they're going to be better off is insanity. But human nature being what it is, that whole concept took root and has infested the planet now for what, over 100 years since he wrote those books, Das Kapital, and it's if knowledge is what we need to disseminate knowledge. We need to be working at disseminating knowledge. If people actually were made to think about what he wrote in that book, communism never would have gotten a footing in the first place.
Okay, so number 6, common law should be common sense.
Yes.
Does what it says on the tin, right?
Well, common law is the written opinions of appellate court justices. And back in the day when this nation withdrew itself from the rule of King George, we actually chose to bring the old common law cases, the old appellate court cases from England over here and make them common law for us. If you read the Constitution of the state of Florida, you'll find right there in the Constitution, it says the common law of England is adopted unless superseded by statute here. But common law is the succession of appellate court cases that tell us the mind and the will of justice, the spirit of justice. What's happened, what was going on originally, it's almost, they're fun to read. And hopefully someday we're going to have them animated with AI and music. And it's just going to be fantastic when somebody gets around to seeing the value of what we're talking about here, the 3 of us and other people, the people I'll be meeting with this afternoon. They're actually fun. Kirksey versus Kirksey and Hadley versus Baxendale and Paulsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. And if you read those cases, you would see that, yeah, that's the way it ought to be. That makes perfect sense. That's common sense. That is That just is just, that's the kind of way that's how I want my government to think. That's the way I want my judges to think. That's how I want my judges to evaluate situations that are brought before them by parties and make a decision. But later on, after the Civil War, where we had such carnage and disappointment and shock and dismay over here in this country, and then you've had your wars over there too. And then we had World War One, and we had this thing called mechanized warfare, which had come up, just almost exploded. The technology of how to kill people just exploded in World War One, and then of course in World War Two. Wow, look at all the good ways we have. We can annihilate entire populations. We can, in the blink of an eye, we can just eliminate 60, 70,000 innocent people. And this got into this concern, this fear of the power that is available, got into legal philosophy. And we see an increase in this diminishing of the value of one. And when you read these cases, they don't make any sense. They don't make common sense anymore. One of them is New York Times versus Sullivan, which had to do with slander. And the case comes out and basically says, if you're a public figure, you can be slandered with impunity. No one can do anything about it. You can't sue. And because it doesn't fit public policy. Well, my question for those people is, well, what is public policy? Who is the public? Who is that? If it's not the individual, who is it? Just because I happen to be the coach of a football team, so now you get to lie about me in public. You get to disparage me in your newspaper, New York Times, and I can't sue you. But that was the outcome. And then we had Roe versus Wade. No matter what you think about that horrible business that probably never will be, that issue will probably never be settled, that Roe versus Wade touched upon. But if you read the case, you find out that the justices, one of whom was Chief Justice, it wasn't Chief Justice, but Justice Stevens, John Paul Stevens, whom I met and challenged him on this. They bring in the idea that part of their justification for the decision they made was that in ancient civilizations, people took their babies out right after being born, took them out and just put them on a rock and left them there to die. That's not common sense. That's not a proper way to make a decision in court. And yet you can't erase that. You can you can Google it today, Roe versus Wade, read the opinion, and you'll see that what I just told you is absolutely the truth. So the common sense flew out the window when this idea of the rights of the collective came in. And it began in the early 20th century. And it has grown and grown and grown. And it is an abscess. It is an evil that must be eradicated. We must get away from it. We must get back to this idea that it has to be good for all of us. The decisions of the courts have to be good. They have to make sense. They have to be common sense. And many times they aren't. And the only way to know that is you have to actually read the appellate court opinions. And the best way to do that, I think, is go back and read some of the old ones. Some of the very early opinions there in England and opinions in France and other places. This isn't true just in our countries, our English-speaking countries. It's true everywhere. Where originally we had courts where the decisions made sense, like Solomon telling the lady, okay, well, we'll cut the baby in half. Well, they didn't cut the baby in half. The mother, who was the real mother, said, no, give the child to the other woman. We had wisdom in our courts. Now we have technicians.
I think if common law was common sense, it would help people understand the law,
Mm-hmm.
assuming that people have got common sense. Now, one thing that you were saying there with regards to that case, the cases you were referring to, those cases, again, if we had the principles, if we reverted to the principles, priority principles,
Mm-hmm.
and rights that can't be enforced are worthless, and we correct that, well, then
Mm-hmm.
the situation you talked about with regards to the slander, that wouldn't come about.
Right.
So we need these priority principles.
But they're not taught in law school. Law schools turn out technicians. And what we have now is we have a secular priesthood all over the world, a secular priesthood. Individuals who've managed to go to law school, pass the bar, sit on the bench in our courts, and decide for us what's right and wrong, what's moral and immoral, and it has to be controlled. It has to be controlled because we are on a path, and the path is spiraling. It was predicted, not only in the scriptures, but it's been predicted by writers throughout history, that there will always be this tendency, this downward spiral of the wisdom of mankind will continually evaporate and has to be restored. It has to be refreshed. As one author said it well, he said each generation needs to reset the landmarks, these principles. They have to be reset for each generation because there's not a child born today that knows these things from birth. And yet we don't have that being taught. The media doesn't teach it. Hollywood doesn't teach it. The rock and roll artists, they're not teaching it. Most of them are angry about something, or they're, what, they lost their girlfriend or whatever. And in the country music people, they're all talking about their pickup trucks and their dog. We don't have anybody instilling in the American public or the English public or any public around the country these guiding principles that must be instilled. It's not optional. It must be instilled, or civilization is going to degrade to the point where it's just going to be like we've seen in so many movies, these Holocaust movies, where people are just killing each other because there is no government, there is no order, there's no hope. Without principles, there's no hope.
Yeah, this particular principle brings to mind, at the moment, we've got a prime minister at the moment, Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer decided to chuck a load of violent criminals out of jail, out of the prison, so that he could fill it with those who had made certain tweets on Twitter or on Facebook. They've all been jailed. They've got 2 years in jail. That's not common sense.
No, just
None of that is common sense. I mean, why would it make sense to throw real sexual offenders and violent criminals out of prison to be able to make room for people who have just made a comment, use freedom of speech online that hasn't caused anything? It didn't cause anyone to die. It didn't, that's not common sense. And it just makes me think, wow, here is a prime minister who's willing to ruin the lives of normal people who are not criminals, who have only made their honest opinion online, in order to make an example of them. None of that makes sense, not one bit. And that now that is common law, because it's the decisions have been decided on. Those people have gone to jail. The precedents have been set.
And the offshoot of it is that you and a large proportion of your public has lost just one more degree of confidence in their ability to rely on the government to do what's right. So when these rules come down that do not make common sense, the people themselves know it doesn't make common sense. It's like recently here in the States, there was an idea that we would compensate all people of color because in prior generations, they had suffered deprivations. No question about that the deprivations were there, the terrible things happened. But the idea to now compensate those people, Or how about this one, to forgive the student loans? So we're just going to forgive the student loans so we can get more votes. The people that we forgive the student loans for, they'll vote for us. And it's not something that the common man believes in. And that's, I think that's a measure of what common sense is. Common sense is something the common man can believe in and support and fight for and die for if necessary. Well, nobody's going to fight for and die for what your prime minister did. It's just no one's going to do that. And but how do we control government if we have a populace that is totally ignorant about the principles? I don't see any other way. That's why what you're doing is a good thing. We promote these principles, we promulgate the principles, we make them interesting, we get people fired up to believe in them and tell other people about them. And then when we have people in high places doing stupid things, we put a stop to it.
I love that you've got a new incoming president and a new cabinet that he's shaking up with. And I think one of the things that Trump and Musk have continued to say is they're going to bring back common sense. Which I think is great, because it just feels like there's all this crazy ideologies that are being promulgated through the schools and through the societies, through the healthcare system, all kinds of directions it's coming at, where none of it makes sense. So you're absolutely right. We need to recognize what is right, what is true, what is common sense, and lead with that front foot rather than allowing others to implant, what's the opposite of common sense? Insanity.
Well, one of those things was the idea that a corporation is on a par with an individual.
No.
In the eyes of government. It doesn't make common sense, and yet it's happening, it's being done, and we're going to have to get new justices into our courts. We're going to have a new perspective on all of these things. I think we can. I think it's going to take a lot of work, and it's definitely going to take a great deal of work and effort and commitment. But it doesn't seem to me like it's optional. We either do it, we either work for civilization. It's a war. I mean, people shouldered their weapons and went to war and got on the LSTs and got out and tried to climb up the beach there at Normandy and at Iwo Jima and didn't get to come home. They died for the very things that we're talking about. And we keep hoping and praying that more people will come along and have that same commitment to at least do something. You know, no one's asking you to shoulder your rifle and climb out of the LST on the beach under enemy fire, but we're at a war right now with this ignorance, this increase of this idea that the autocratic rule and the rights of corporations and the rights of collectives outweigh the rights and the value of individuals. It's got to stop.
All right, we've got the final priority principle is probability is not proof. Now we have these terms in the court system, right? We've got proof is needed if you're going to be making a claim, or if you're defending a claim, you might need proof as well to provide the court as evidence of something. But probability plays a big aspect in the civil court system, particularly. How would you say this principle relates to us and this in everyday life?
Well, a large number of people probably were arrested and will probably spend time in prison during the past 2 hours because we have this thing called, allowing probability, circumstantial evidence to be treated as proof. I did a whole thing on this some time ago where I did an in-depth study and discovered that in every state except California, a civil court is allowed to make one presumption based on known facts. I mean, there are facts that can be known. They are known. I live just outside of Tampa. I don't live on the moon. There are things that can be established for absolute certain, and then there are things that can be inferred from those facts. In a civil court, we allow a jury to make an inference if it's reasonable with regard to the known facts. It has to be reasonable. What we don't allow, but is allowed quite often, is that people will make an inference, then they make an inference from the inference. Then they make maybe even another inference. I won a case some years ago where a fellow was, he came home, he was out of town, and some people tried to set fire to his house because they for reasons that I don't have time to go into right now. But they found, the fire marshal, they found that there were these cardboard boxes. And inside the cardboard boxes were a device with mouse traps and old-fashioned matches. And get this, the phosphorus on those matches was burned. But the boxes burned from the outside in. Now, it takes a little bit of thinking to get this picture. In other words, the mouse traps were rigged to make it look like they had started the fire. But the boxes didn't burn from the inside out. And yet whoever put those boxes there had lit the matches, the phosphorus, and blown them out so that the trap would look like it had. And then they'd gone in and when I was able to finally use discovery tools to get to the bottom of it, and we found that the proof of accelerants were poured all over the place. He wasn't there. He was out of town. And all these boxes were put there to make it look like that he had set fire to his own house. Well, one of the things that came up was they said, well, he's the only one that had a key. He had to be the one to think about it. This was their reasoning. He was the only one that had a key. So he's the only one that could have done this. Well, it just goes beyond reason. So I won the case, and the insurance company had to pay. But there are rules. The rules rule. The probability doesn't make something true. It might be probable, but even probability, there's also this aspect that, well, maybe not. Maybe somebody could pick a lock. And I remember I had to formally in writing, I asked the fire marshal, did you check all the locks on the windows at the back of the house? No, I didn't check the locks on the windows at the back of the house. It could have come in through the window. There are all these things, and people are going to prison and they're suffering because of assumptions being made, inferences being made on facts. Now, to carry it one more step further about people that have relationships, marriages, business relationships, where people make an assumption, they infer something from facts, and then maybe they make an inference from that. And all kinds of problems come up when we could have just said, well, here, do the facts establish this, or are we guessing? And so that's kind of what the principle is, that probability is not proof any more than imagination is truth. That's just not reality. And reality is going to be reality no matter what we want it to be. It just simply is reality. And too many people are suffering because of this abuse of what I'm talking about. Circumstantial evidence is not evidence. Evidence is evident. You can see it. That's what the word comes from, vident. It's something you can see, something you can touch, you can smell, you can bite it. You can hold it in your hands. Circumstantial evidence, you can't. So, and too many people, whether it's in court where it's making inferences from facts, or just making inferences and then making another inference and another inference, and then, well, but you could have done this and you probably did that, and so forth and so on. And it's destroying relationships, and it's undermining again the ability of the people themselves to make wise decisions in the world, instead of allowing somebody else to rather push them around with opinions and so forth, because opinions aren't truth either. Drawing inferences. It's what it's just drawing inferences. And you choose what inference you want to draw, and it's not right. It's hurtful, and it undermines it undermines stability.
Yeah, but it also makes them look silly as well.
Oh, well, that too.
Simon, your views on probability is not proof?
Yes, we have this situation in the court system where I think in order to dispense and give determinations in the vast quantity of court cases that are passing through the court system, the burden of proof is so high, and it would be such a burden to actually require proof that they've kind of taken a step down. They've lowered the standard, and now we're working with this thing called on the balance of probability. What does the judge think happened based on what the information put before the judge, and that's perhaps the quickest way to dispense with justice. The problem is when we're talking maybe on a criminal front, or certainly people getting fined and statutory violations. Is that what we really want? I guess it's fine while it's happening to someone else, but it's not fine when it happens to us.
And I think you asked the question, is that what we really want? Is that what we, the public, want? Is that how we want our leaders to make decisions that affect our lives and the lives of our loved ones?
With regards to the priority principles, and this is to both of you, we've obviously launched it. The website's now live. Everybody can go and interact with each of the priority principles and leave their comments, their questions, their concerns, their suggestions, etc. We want this to be really interactive. But what would you say to our audience who are looking at those principles, and what would you say to them in how to apply them or even contribute further to what we're doing?
Well, it's one thing to know them. It's another thing to be inspired by them. We talk about, what part that we have in doing this, but the truth existed before we were born. These principles have existed before the earth was created, and they're going to be true forever. And to just imagine the potentiality for tens of maybe hundreds of thousands of people to begin to realize that they have power to make their world a better place, but they have to be guided by some sort of measure to make decisions that aren't based on just probability or opinion or the kaleidoscopically changing public view of morality or whatever, but actually base their decisions and their actions on rock solid truths that they not only that they can personally believe in, but they can collectively agree about, and work together as a body of human beings collectively coming together and cooperating with each other and working with each other and being creative about promoting and promulgating these truths and other truths that are always true. Because if it's not always true, then it's not a primary principle. But to do this for the sake of the children, for the sake of future generations.
Good. And what do you hope, Spaniard? What do you see coming from this endeavor?
Well, I think a lot of people talk about certainly in the alternative movements that they're seeking truth. Certainly, you've got all these conspiracy theorists. They're seeking the truth. It's about walking the walk, isn't it? As opposed to just talking the talk. It's one thing to call for truth. It's another thing to walk the truth, and it's another thing to walk and live your life by a code. I mean, we often think about maybe the knights of old and how they had a code of chivalry. Well, what code do people have nowadays? Is it anything goes? Is it anything goes, or is it do you
Wild
actually want
West.
to exist by a code? Yeah, is it the Wild West, or is it a case whereby you want to exist by some kind of moral code? A lot of people want to exist by a moral code, but there's only one way to do it, and you've got to do it. You just got to throw the gauntlet down, and you just got to go with it. And I know that can be quite difficult, and I suppose it's just like going on a diet. That's probably my biggest problem, trying to stick to it. And but you have to keep bringing yourself back and reminding yourself of the principles and the elements of the code that you want to exist by. If you don't, then what are you left with? And is that what you want for your children and your offspring? If we don't lay the foundation down and exist by it now and do our utmost to actually uphold those principles, well, then what are you really setting the future up for? I think the principles are the principles. I think people they've forgotten those principles and the morals by which they should be existing because they have accepted a lower standard of existence. They've accepted it because everyone else is accepting it. And so they've allowed themselves, from a standard point of view, to slip down the scale. And they've just tolerated what's going on around them. And they've become part of it in some cases, right? And joined in some cases. I don't think the principles have ever been different. I think the principles are the principles. The morals are the morals. We need to remind ourselves of those, and that's what we need to do. With so much of, I think, where everything has fallen by the wayside to such an extent in modern society, and the way that things are now, I think we just have to remind ourselves of what these principles are, and come back and start living by them.
Okay, good stuff. Well, the website's now launched. It's now fully available for all our audiences. We encourage everybody to go to them, interact with them, watch them, review them, offer your comments and suggestions. And if you would like to, there's a download button. I think it's under the sponsor page, where you can actually download the logo of the website and you include it on your website, linking your websites to ours. And that way, everybody who sees our logo on their website will know that you're in alignment with the priority principles. So that's one thing that people can do, apart from obviously interacting with them and living them and breathing them and sharing them and celebrating them with others, right?
Well, and committing to upholding them. I mean, that's one of that's one of the purposes of the website, is for people to actually say, yeah, I'm going to give this a thumbs up and I'm going to commit to that principle. I believe that is a principle we should all share and uphold.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Indeed.
But anyhow, let's wrap this up. So I'd just like to say thank you for attending, Simone, and Dr. Graves. Thank you so much for your time and the inspiration behind all of this and the work and effort that you've put in doing the voiceovers and, of course, inspiring the actual priority principles themselves. So
thank you.
We really, really do appreciate you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.